We are live.
A very warm welcome to you all. I'm Sneha Khatri. As an alumni of the university, I feel specially privileged to be calling you for the launch of the degree. This is an important occasion for JSIA as it is the one and only program in India with a special focus on diplomacy and foreign policy as a separate academic discipline within India. I would now like to invite Professor Dr. C. Rajkumar, the Vice Chancellor, to give his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Sneha. Very good evening to all of you joining in India. Good morning to our friends in the United States, and good afternoon to others who may be in Europe and other parts of the world. It's indeed a very special moment as we launch a new undergraduate degree program at the Jindal School of International Affairs, the Bachelor of Arts Honours in Diplomacy and Foreign Policy. The Jindal School of International Affairs has itself come of age. When we launched the School of International Affairs in the year 2011, we were conscious of the fact that the first degree program that we ended up launching was the Masters in Diplomacy, Law and Business. That was a very unique program at that time. It created new forms of innovation in pedagogy and interdisciplinarity, after which we launched the BA in Global Affairs and then the BA in Political Science more recently. And now this constitutes the third undergraduate program within the Jindal School of International Affairs, a Bachelor of Arts in Diplomacy and Foreign Policy. I am grateful to Sri Sanjay Bhattacharya, Secretary of the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, a very distinguished Indian Foreign Service officer, for accepting our invitation to be a guest of honor at the launch. I'm also grateful to Professor Dr. Holly Semetko, Professor of Media and International Affairs at the Emory University, for accepting our invitation to be part of the launch and to deliver a special address. My deep gratitude is also to Professor Ravi Thapar, Executive Dean of the Jindal School of International Affairs, my colleague, Professor Dr. Sriram Chawlia, Dean of the School of International Affairs, and also Professor Dr. Upasana Mahanta, Dean of Admissions and Outreach at OP Jindal Global University. Let me take a moment to reflect on this historic juncture where the university is placed today. Literally 3 days from now, OP Jindal Global University will be celebrating its 12th anniversary. We were founded in the year 2009, and we began the first academic session of the first school of the university, Jindal Global Law School, with only 100 students and 10 faculty members on 30th September 2009. Since then, we never looked back. In the last 12 years, we've established 12 different schools in business, international affairs, public policy, liberal arts, journalism, architecture, banking and finance, environment and sustainability, psychology and counseling. Of course, more recently, we've also announced the establishment of the School of Languages and Literature and the School of Public Health and Human Development. We moved from 10 full-time faculty members to today we have nearly 1,000 full-time faculty members. We moved from, say, 100 students to over 8,500 students. Such has been the growth and evolution of the university. But more importantly, one of the things that we did was to advance the cause of higher education through promoting excellence in innovation, particularly in those areas which focused on the broader liberal arts, humanities, and social sciences imagination. That was the vision that created the Jindal School of International Affairs, and that continues to shape the future of higher education as well as the education that we offer at Jindal School of International Affairs, as well as OP Jindal Global University. For all those students who are planning to pursue the Bachelor of Arts in Diplomacy and Foreign Policy, let me quickly say that this is one of the most unique initiatives that we have promoted within the university, not just in the Jindal School of International Affairs. So while I'm not a diplomat and I have very distinguished colleagues who are part of the panel, I've been thinking about what are the core objectives of this program and what do we expect that students who end up pursuing this program will be at the vanguard of pursuing their own careers. So I've identified 10 major objectives of the program, which I will quickly run through. First, the most important part of this effort is to build capacities among young people to promote multilateral and bilateral relations through their understanding of the world of diplomacy. Second, to train them and to hone their skills and to develop knowledge and perspectives to help them develop economic, trade, and investment relations between the countries. Third, to help them recognize the importance of peaceful settlement of disputes. At a time when the world has numerous conflicts to handle, it's important for students of diplomacy and foreign policy to appreciate the importance of peaceful settlement of disputes. Four, advancing the need for respecting international law. This is one of the most important objectives because respecting international law and international institutions ought to become the fulcrum around which diplomacy and foreign policy can grow. Five, to be able to work closely with intergovernmental organizations and international institutions, both of which are critical for the future. Six, to work towards developing strategic partnerships with individuals, organizations, and institutions to advance the cause of foreign policy. This is another very, very critical role that a study in diplomacy and foreign policy ought to do. And regardless of whether you work within governmental setting or beyond, this is something which you will be doing for most part of your life. Seven, to develop communications and engagement with the media and other organizations internationally about the work that takes place within the government. This is particularly true for those who end up choosing a path of working within the government. Number eight, developing institutional capacities for building bridges and linkages with the diaspora in the countries where they work. Again, a factor that is most relevant for those who end up pursuing, let's say, a career in foreign service. Nine, to provide leadership on the important issues of our time, be it on environment, climate change, migration, health, which is obviously a current theme, human rights, terrorism, international security. To simply name some of those big issues, you ought to be providing leadership. And the last is something that is very difficult to achieve, and particularly for those who are belonging to foreign service, balancing intellectual integrity, institutional credibility, while being the spokesperson for your own governments. This is an aspect which I'm sure many of you will be pursuing all through your life. So in a way, we are very excited about the launch of this new undergraduate program. I want to quickly say that the opportunity to study at OP Jindal Global University means that you not only end up studying at the School of International Affairs, you are part of a larger university setting in which you will be pursuing interdisciplinary courses across these 12 schools. There are over 500 plus courses that we offer every day from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m., which is available for every student in the university. In addition to that interdisciplinarity that is deeply woven in our academic culture, you also have opportunities to pursue student exchange programs, dual degree programs, and short-term study abroad programs in universities around the world. Every year, over 30 plus students go to Harvard pursuing a program on human rights and development. A similar number go to Oxford, where we have partnership in which they pursue a program on multilateralism and international diplomacy. And we also have another program at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. And there are essentially 350 plus partnerships in 65 different countries in which our students have an opportunity to pursue a range of international engagement. We also have a very effective Office of the Career Services, and that office helps our students to pursue internships and ultimately help them in career development opportunities as well. As I end my short reflection, I want to say that the opportunity to study at OP Jindal Global University, I believe, is going to be a transformative experience for each one of you. 12 years ago, little did we imagine that a small university established in the rural part of India, in this town of Sonipat, in the state of Haryana, will have this global impact today with over 8,000 students from 20 countries and 28 states of India, from 42 countries in the world from which the faculty members have come. It has become a true intellectual powerhouse. This possibility to seek high quality education and in that process transforming the society at large is a phenomenal opportunity that is given to you. In many ways, the pandemic has brought to bear the significant inequalities on the basis of which all of us live. UNESCO has estimated that since March 2020, over 1.6 billion young people have been deprived of their education opportunities. They have been simply removed out of any form of education because of the pandemic. But since March 2020, all our students have got education. The classes have not interrupted, not a single class has been left. We have all been able to tune to technology. We have been able to conduct examinations, have assessment, have grading, graduated students, had entrance examination for new students, admitted them, and the new cycle has also begun. While many of us have deep qualms about the online education itself, the fact remains that we have been able to pursue the intellectual project, the learning project, uninterrupted. And this is the privilege that only few of us in the world have. And with all privilege comes responsibility. I want to end by saying that today, OP Jindal Global University has been recognized as one of the leading institutions in the world. The government of India in 2020 recognized us as an institution of eminence. Among the 1,000 universities in India, only 10 public and 10 private universities have been bestowed upon this unique distinction. In addition to that, the QS World University Rankings has consistently ranked us as among the top 700 universities in the world, among the 40,000 universities, and India's #1 ranked private university. Our law school has been ranked #1 in India, but also 76th in the world. But more importantly, just a few days ago, QS released a very significant ranking, which is the QS World University Rankings on graduate employability. And in that rankings, for the first time, OP Jindal Global University broke into the top 500 in the world and became one of only 12 Indian universities and one of only 2 Indian private universities to be in the top 500 in the world and to have been ranked in that. I say this to share with you that the opportunity that is available for you will help you not only to get the knowledge, expertise, and skills, but also to be able to make a big difference. Lastly, I want to say that with the kind of education that we receive, we also have responsibilities towards public service. One of the remarkable things about the Jindal School of International Affairs is that it not only educates and inspires young people to pursue meaningful careers, but also to ensure that they make public service as a part of their larger vision, to be able to matter to many lives which are indeed need for that intervention. And the education that you have should help you to make a difference to those lives. And that is why it's important for us to seek purpose and meaning to our lives. With those words, once again, I would like to congratulate the Dean and the Executive Dean and the faculty members of the Jindal School of International Affairs for launching a very important program, the BA Honors in Diplomacy and Foreign Policy. Thank you very much for our 2 distinguished guests who have accepted to deliver their special addresses on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rajkumar, for your remarks. I'm sure these 10 points that you highlighted on the importance of the degree at this juncture will serve as beneficial for people who want to understand more. I now invite the Dean of Jindal School of International Affairs, Professor Dr. Sri Ramcholia, to give his opening remarks on the degree.
Thank you, Sneha. Greetings, everyone. It's really honor for us to be launching our 6th degree program, which, as the Vice Chancellor just mentioned, is a very unique proposition, something that's never been done before. And that is our forte. At Jindal, we have always been at the cutting edge or the bleeding edge in terms of innovating and creating new degree programs, which have never been heard before, but which can then become, over time, mainstreamed into the consciousness of young people, and through which we can create new currents of careers and aspirations for young people. So BA Diplomacy and Foreign Policy is one such from our bouquet, a new offering and a very unique one, because generally the study of diplomacy and foreign policy has been seen as a subset of international relations, and particularly as a subset of what we call decision-making theories. So there are the mainstream theories of realism, liberalism, Marxism, constructivism. These are the mainstay of international relations. And then after those, they say that there is a fifth dimension, which is decision making. And there is a variety of decision making theories under which foreign policy making is generally studied as an academic discipline. But never before has it been highlighted so much in the form of a full degree program, which will then train young people to become specialists in it over a period of 3 years, and then beyond after they complete their bachelor's and move towards a master's education. So I want to mention a few things that stand out in this new degree. When you look at the curriculum, there are things that have never been studied in a systematic and detailed way, the way we are doing it here in this degree. First, there's a lot of focus on public diplomacy, outreach, media, communications. And we are very honored Professor Holly Semetko of Emory University is here to enlighten us about this particular aspect. Two, we have courses on economic diplomacy. Ambassador Ravi Thapar is our executive dean, is a specialist in it. We have actually 6 retired diplomats among our faculty at present in the School of International Affairs, many of whom will be teaching in the BA-DFP program. So you'll be learning from a lot of practitioners. 3, we have courses on cultural diplomacy. We have courses on intercultural communication and negotiation, which is the heart of diplomacy. We have courses on diplomatic practice, on treaty making, on things like conflict resolution. So these are, the core, the heart of the practice of diplomacy. So theory and praxis, we have mixed it together so that you're well-balanced learning. If you're aiming for joining the Indian Foreign Service or the Foreign Service of the country to which you belong to, there's no better platform than this kind of program. If you're aiming to become a media specialist in foreign affairs or foreign journalism, this is the stepping stone. If you're aiming to join the UN ultimately and work for, to solve the big problems that the Vice Chancellor mentioned, the big problems of our time, nothing better than this. And of course, if you're just interested in foreign policy, which is the other leg of this degree program, and understanding the decision-making processes, how a state makes up its national interest, for example. Everyone says we are operating on the basis of national interest. Every leader, every government says national interest. How is this formulated? What are the inputs that go into making national interest? Do they remain forever or do they transform over time with the change in political leadership, change in the times, change in the international system? These are the kind of things you're going to be learning. Very exciting. Foreign language. There's a mandatory foreign language component in this degree program. You're going to be learning non-English foreign languages. We have at least 6 on offer: Arabic, Dari, or /Persian. We have Spanish, French, Mandarin Chinese, and German. So you essentially pick up all the skills required to be able to operate either at the national level on behalf of a nation state or at the intergovernmental level. So this is the kind of package we are bringing for you. And those of you who look at the curriculum, read our brochure, talk to us, you'll realize that this is something. And we also have something called a Diplomats Development Program, which is a kind of a co-curricular activity, which will help you intern with embassies and high commissions and consulates across India during your summer and winter breaks. And will also help you, enable you to do international internships, summer schools that the Vice Chancellor mentioned in Oxford and Fletcher and such places. So you can essentially touch all the key nodes to prepare yourself to be a future diplomat. Many of you aspire to be that. You don't know how to get there. We are here to help you find your way to reach your destination. So I'll not say much else except that the world of diplomacy is even more in need of young, fresh talent like you. It's high time that all of you get involved in policy making in some form or the other. And this is the ideal platform to yourself become policy makers and to shape and mold the complex processes that are deciding our changing times. So best wishes to all students looking to take up BA Honors Diplomacy and Foreign Policy, and we are there to guide you as you take on this new path. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Cholia. We'll now move on to our special guest, Shri Sanjay Bhattacharya, Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs. He's responsible for our relations with the Arab world, passport services, consular relations, and diaspora affairs, Sherpa to BRICS, and representative to Jal Jeevan Mission. Earlier, he served as an ambassador of India to Turkey and ambassador of India to Egypt. He studied economics at St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi, and at Delhi School of Economics. He's a perfect person to be highlighting the benefits of the degree as a practitioner. He can educate us on the practicing part of the diplomacy and foreign policy. I'd welcome Shri Sanjay Bhattacharya to speak.
Thank you, Sneha. Vice Chancellor Dr. C. Rajkumar, Dean Sriram Chalia, fellow panelist Dr. Holly Semetko, my dear friend Ambassador Ravi Thapar, distinguished academicians, and dear students, Namaskar. Thank you for inviting me to this event, and congratulations on the launch of a new undergraduate program on diplomacy and foreign policy at the Jindal School of International Affairs. There was a growing need for such a specialized program, and your timing has been most opportune. We are witnessing restructuring of economic and social architectures, experiencing momentum in new technology and innovation, and major developments in global affairs are afoot. We wish you great success in empowering a new generation of diplomats and foreign policy analysts. Having been a practicing diplomat for well over 3 decades, I should speak from that perspective. The job of a diplomat, as you all know, is to represent his country abroad. But I see his role essentially as that of a negotiator. He has to expand the world of opportunities and negotiate acceptable options. The ambassador's task is to advance his country's national interests, that was referred to, in another country's, that is a sovereign state or a group of states. The bilateral, the multilateral, and the plurilateral relations seek to strengthen the relations between states, promote business and scientific cooperation, and facilitate cultural exchanges. Winning the hearts and minds, aligning interests, and conducting negotiations and concluding them mean that the ambassador and his team at the embassy are constantly engaged with the presidents, prime ministers, ministers, government officials, industry, scientific establishments, academicians, friends of India and the diaspora, and many, many others across the country towards those objectives. We see, however, in some ways, that the classical understanding of diplomacy and foreign policy has endured. In fact, even though there have been changing behavior and protocols and new practices have evolved. In some ways, Chanakya's Arthashastra, Machiavelli's Prince, or Sato's diplomatic practice are still basic texts and will remain relevant, as do the theories of the honeycomb of relations, or the role of the state, or the importance of timely and effective information, the limits of intervention, and so on. These form the heart of foreign policy and diplomacy. The notion of power, authority, and how it is exercised is crucial in interstate relations. We have various understandings of power. We sometimes look at it in terms of GDP, or the Chinese understanding of comprehensive national strength, or the US notion of the ability to influence the entire world, or the Soviet matrix of balance of powers, and many, many others. We also see that there has been a preference for peace and development, and a realization that war was not the only way to resolve differences. And this in some ways gave an impetus to negotiations and diplomacy. In another earlier era, say even during Clausewitz's time, war was seen almost as inevitable, and diplomacy was perhaps a way or a process towards that end. Traditionally, diplomacy uses interactive models, recognizing the importance of protocol, reciprocity, and interest. The older ideas of win at all costs, which corresponds to zero-sum games, have given way to win-win or positive sum or mutually beneficial solutions. The negotiating mandates and the flexibility that is provided to the diplomat when he leaves from his host country is one that influences the kind of offers that he can make and the kind of responses that the host country would be willing to accept for an agreement. Leverage could be assessed, as Nai said, in terms of soft power or hard power or even smart power. But I've seen in my experience that diplomacy is often about the choices that one makes, the leverage that one achieves, the countervailing force that one cultivates, and recognizing that duress is not acceptable. And above all, and this has been said again, we have to be in the pursuit of finding many ways to follow the pursuit of national interest. So today I shall share some vignettes of diplomatic practice and the role of an ambassador through 3 diplomatic missions from history and literature, and 3 instances from my own experiences. The first story. In the Ramayana, an ancient epic, when the armies of Lord Rama reached Lanka and war seemed inevitable, Rama sent his emissary Angad to the court of Ravana to announce his intention to reclaim Sita, his wife who had been kidnapped, and proposed that war could be avoided. Look at the choice of his ambassador. Angad was the son of Bali, who had once defeated Ravana in battle, and Angad was a great warrior himself. Of all the ministers, and then he challenged all present that if anyone could even move his leg, which he had placed very firmly on the ground, then Rama would go back without fighting. You all must be familiar with the story and the import of this mission. What are the lessons for us? An ambassador must have the complete confidence of his master, and that is usually reciprocal. He must deliver the message cogently. He must instill fear, as in the case of an impending war, and evoke reverence in general cases in the minds of those in the host country. And he must remain focused on his objective. The second diplomatic mission. Sir Henry Roe came in 1615 to the court of Jahangir with a letter from James I to establish trade relations between England and the Mughals. This was a time when mercantile interests were going global. We know that the English had also sent a similar missive to the Ottoman court. After 4 years of negotiations with the Mughal court and detailed reports that he sent back to the East India Company for advice bore no immediate fruit, Henry Roe left in 1619, and it was for his successors to obtain the royal firman to establish the first English factory, which was the stepping stone to British rule in India. Sir Henry Roe's picture has a prominent place in Westminster. And this is one of the takeaways that we have, that we must take from this mission. For such major missions, it is necessary to carry the credentials from the king himself to establish the authority and then to present it to the receiving king. It is necessary to make meticulous preparations and engage in sincere negotiations, not to be impatient about the outcome, and always leave room for a possible favorable outcome, even if you know it may not come during your term, and it may come only in the future. The third mission was also very fascinating. The secret visit of Henry Kissinger in July 1971 to Beijing, which sought to prepare for Nixon's visit to China to achieve normalization of ties with the communist country. It was the era of the Cold War, and this was obviously a very strategic initiative. Zhou Enlai was clear that the recognition of the People's Republic of China could not run concurrently with that of Taiwan. Also, Nixon was not very keen to give up too much on Taiwan. As we know, Kissinger, who was anxious to finalize the Nixon visit, was flexible. However, he did not use Zhou's formulation, but he said, "We are not advocating and which gave sufficient leeway to Zhou, and rapprochement was achieved. The outcomes of that momentous step unveiled over several decades. In fact, we are still witnessing its geopolitical consequences. The insights that emerged suggested there was need for forthright definition of objectives. It is important to have clarity in communication and formulation, and to maintain a steadfast approach on matters of national sovereignty and strategic importance." After these three anecdotes of historical developments on war and peace, trade and commerce, and strategic decisions, let us dwell on a few personal experiences, which were significant from the perspective of India's foreign policy. I was but a young boy when Bangladesh was created after the 1971 war. But in 2011, when I was posted in Dhaka, I was involved in the negotiations for the land boundary agreement and also engaged in the eventual physical delineation of the boundary. These corrected the imbalances of pertaining to adverse possessions and enclaves within each other's territories, and they prioritized citizen interests. I realized how a very special set of norms were needed when dealing with and working with neighbors. Our policy of neighborhood first was guided by a desire to deepen friendship and promote the social and economic linkages in order to build on the historical and even family bonds that were already present. Notions of reciprocity or zero-sum approach that could lead to friction or dissatisfaction, they could be replaced by more dynamic and win-win, mutually beneficial options. Keeping the people at the center and encouraging their involvement could be crucial to promote one's interests in the neighborhood. My second anecdote. I was in Tokyo sometime after the turn of the century, and this was a time when we were crafting our bilateral comprehensive strategic partnership with Japan. We had added depth and dimension to our partnership and given it new momentum, and the bilateral engagement was very strong. While this bilateral thrust was ongoing, Obama, during his first term, visited Tokyo and outlined his pivot to Asia concept. I was present at that speech. It had a natural synergy with the idea of the Indo-Pacific. It was also in harmony with our Look East policy of the time, which was, as you know, subsequently upgraded to the Act East. By that time, I was back in headquarters, and the initiative that I was engaged in to develop the Act East into a plan and to align it with the Indo-Pacific had already begun. There was a confluence of ideas and interests as these different concepts came together through academic dialogue, official engagements, and also political interactions. Today, we find the Indo-Pacific has acquired greater resonance than ever before. It reflects an emerging paradigm of power and cooperation. It recognizes the shifting of the strategic economic gravity towards Asia, and it encourages the adjustments not only in America, but also in Europe. The future of our economies, our technologies, and in fact, our polities would also be closely linked with these emerging trends in the Indo-Pacific. My last experience. Some years ago, as Sneha mentioned, I had served as ambassador of India to Cairo and Ankara. Both had seen the unrest in the Middle East and the rise of fundamentalism, terrorism, and political Islam. Both also had profound influence on regional dynamics. We know that terrorism, which feeds on radicalization, had long been a scourge in the Arab world. In our neighborhood, Pakistan has been a sponsor of terrorism directed against us, but radical Pakistanis and such groups were also involved in terrorist activities in other theaters as well. And it was a source of concern to most countries and their security establishments in the Middle East. My experience in the region provided an insight into conflict and terrorism. I saw the inroads made by religious fundamentalists and radical elements and the inability or sometimes the reluctance of moderate forces to voice their opposition. I realized how the spread of non-state actors who dominated the stage of terrorism also posed a threat to the established state organs and to the states themselves. And I became aware of the tremendous support that these terrorist organizations received, both political and material, from various sources. I was convinced of the need for the civilized world to come together to address this menace in a comprehensive manner, or they would impact the lives of our succeeding generations. To sum up, I would say it is important to recognize that power is an essential element of foreign policy and the practice of diplomacy. For diplomacy to succeed, it is essential to build national strength, but it is equally important to develop the willingness and the means to use it to advance one's interests. I've also realized that negotiations are essential, even if they do not always fully resolve differences. I know that soft power is essential and useful in the projection of ideas, but to build influence, particularly long-term, it is necessary to have hard power. Despite significant changes in the balance of power, existing powers tend to prefer status quo and remain unwilling to share their high table. Therefore, for countries seeking a greater role, it is necessary to continuously push the idea of reform of institutions, promote multilateralism, and pursue democratization for more equitable representation. It is equally important to take positions on regional and global issues, on issues that concern humanity, and to be involved in the emerging developments. But at the same time, while we do have a certain degree of political policy consensus and consistency, in the world of diplomacy, we need to maintain and retain flexibility when we are expanding our spheres of influence and interest. Finally, let me share some of the key lessons that I've learned. First, diplomacy is the art of maximizing options. Both sides can leave the negotiating table with something gained. Second, diplomacy is the science of the possible, balancing foreign policy priorities with capacities of one's home country. Third, diplomacy is pragmatism, recognizing we are in an era of globalization and everyone matters, and that adds strength. Fourth, diplomacy in the age of disruption depends on dynamism, taking advantage of the digital world and data-informed policy. And fifth, diplomacy is the art of building trust and friendships, which then become partnerships, both at the personal and institutional levels. So I think I should end with a confession. Representing India as a diplomat has been an exhilarating experience. If I were to be at that juncture of life, to have to decide my career options once again, I would choose to be a diplomat. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, sir, for the truly fascinating, inspiring, and insightful words. And you've captured both the theory and praxis of diplomacy and foreign policy. And you've drawn so beautifully from your own personal journey and experiences that we are truly fascinated to hear your words. Thank you so much. And before we call upon Professor Dr. Semetko to deliver her special address for the evening, we would like to take just a brief moment here to virtually launch the program of a Bachelor in Diplomacy and Foreign Policy. So we take a moment to virtually unveil the brochure of the program. So congratulations to JSIA, and let us all come together to virtually unveil the brochure of the program. May I request the IT department to please unveil the brochure.
Thank you, Professor Upasna. I'd now like to call Professor Dr. Holly A. Semetko, Professor of Media and International Relations at Emory University. Professor Semetko is the ESA Griggs Candler Professor of Media and International Affairs and Professor of Political Science at Emory University in Atlanta. With over 100 publications, her research on influence, strategy, and campaigns in international contexts extends from the US, UK, Germany, Turkey, and European Union to India, China, and South Korea. Dr. Semetko established the Hale Institute's research program in 2004 to advance faculty research and partnered with a variety of institutions to co-sponsor symposia, including the European Central Bank, Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, diplomatic missions from Argentina, Brazil, China, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Turkey, and UK, Seoul National University, and Nanjing University's Institute for Advanced Studies in Humanities and Social Sciences. She has also held fellowships from Howard University's Schorstein Center for Press, Politics and Public Policy, and the German Marshall Fund of the United States. As we know that this following course includes a huge media component, and there is a component of cultural diplomacy which relates with media. Professor Semetko will have a lot of insightful takes on how media, the role of media in the changing diplomacy landscape.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm very excited to be speaking to this group, as well as to learn, as I have from the previous remarks, so much about what the program is going to offer, as well as from Ambassador Bhattacharya's experiences. I myself thought about citing Arthashastra, but I decided, no, I won't go back that far. But I currently am a professor of media and international affairs in political science. And I had the privilege for 10 years after moving back to the United States. I had lived abroad for many years, about 16 years, doing graduate work at the London School of Economics. And then again, being hired over after coming back to the States, going back again to work as a research professor in audience and public opinion research. And so that's right up the alley of public diplomacy. But although all that was prior to what we know today, which is what all of you have grown up on probably, which is the platform society, the social media, the rapid way in which the internet has changed everything. Now, granted, in India in 2003, for example, when I was just starting to be the Vice Provost for International Affairs at Emory and Director of the Halle Institute for Global Learning, named after Klaus Halle, who was a German drafted into the Nazi army at 16 and ended up on the wrong side of the Elbe, that is in Russian hands practically. Germans and Russians did not want to meet. He swam across the Elbe, ran to the French side, and then ended up in the American sector where he started delivering Coca-Cola. And eventually he was moving to the United States in the 50s and retired in the 90s and donated a center to Emory University with the idea that Hall Institute for Global Learning promotes interaction among people. And in his view, I met him and worked with him for about a year before he passed. The media gets in our way of understanding one another. And so I was literally leading faculty groups who had never been abroad. We have very Eurocentric faculty in the United States, right? Every university has the same problem. And I was leading them to Korea, China, Hong Kong, Japan, and also India. We had longer standing connections with India, but in this role as vice provost, I was able to do something innovative. And I wanted to mention this because it is very hard to become a foreign service officer. You have to pass a very tough exam. I have worked with 3 Indian ambassadors to the United States and hosted them at Emory University while I was serving as vice provost. One was Meera Shankar, and we were happy to convince her that if they had to choose between opening a new consulate in Seattle or Atlanta, go for Atlanta first, which India did, which we were very happy about. Then Nirupama Rao, we also hosted her at Emory. And finally, the ambassador who I used to meet with when he was DCM in Washington, and then he became ambassador to France, India's ambassador to France, and then again back to America, that is Arun Kumar Singh, who occasionally comes through and speaks to my classes. And you can see that when he's speaking to the class, or when any of these people who I've just mentioned, there is a certain gravitas that the students who are only one click away from disinformation online, and believe me, one click away from a narrative about India that is and the current government that is very problematic, and I'd say a very false narrative. So if I could not explain Article 370 or Kashmir, I had the ambassador there to talk about it. And he talked about the history of Kashmir, and he really opened the minds of students to understand the history of Kashmir, that what they were not reading because it wasn't there online. So I want to say that if you're in the field of diplomacy through the Foreign Office, it is a very important position. And if you're not in the IAS, or if you're not in the Foreign Office, there are many other positions that are available to you with this knowledge and with this degree, including the one that I had, which was serving as the International Affairs Officer for my university. I was building partnerships around the world. My staff went on to work without PhDs to work in the international affairs offices of law schools. For example, one is up at Northwestern Law School. So, every organization, especially since we were seeing in the last 20 years that the internet has upended everything, and that beginning with websites and then blogs, and now with social media, every institution and every sector, every business has a presence. If you don't, where's your business, right? And so we see the internet changing dramatically all of what we took for granted. While there was public diplomacy prior to the internet, it took on a whole new level of meaning when we started to have the internet access. And when we started to see countries, diplomats put themselves forward, as well as non-diplomats, corporates from different countries, or leading musicians, let's say, from different countries, and educators from different countries. And so we see this, the internet providing a new lens through which people are learning about countries that they were limited before to what their news media offered. And that's where, getting back to Klaus Halle, when I started in 2003, it was really the news media that offered us the image of India, more than Indians themselves, more than diplomats from India, right? Today, we see a much broader array of experts online. We also see that India is the largest country in terms of number of users of social media. So on Facebook, for example, Instagram, as well as on Twitter. And I am impressed by watching the ambassadors of India, as well as other countries online, speaking during difficult times, but and during more relaxed times, although we don't have those, I would say, anymore. We're moving at a rapid pace. And I think the backdrop to all of this discussion on the internet is this idea of rapidly accelerating technologies that are accelerating faster than we can imagine, technologies that are changing things that we may not know are changing. And, in terms of, let's say, the biochemical industry or biochemical business or biopharmaceuticals, suddenly there's a new invention, right? And part of this is due to technology available, but also what we see in the accelerated form of technologies made available is that innovation is coming out from everywhere. And so we'll see it online, but we'll also see it in the fact that you are a relatively very young school. It's such an advantage to have your, decade, 12 years, was it, that the chancellor said, that you started, because, look where you are innovating in the whole space of disciplines, right? I work at a university that was happy to be 150 some years old, right? But we also have just people, and this is probably true of all disciplines in all universities, in the US and many in Europe, many disciplines are not going to give way. And so being probably in the only institution that tends to be governed the same way that it was in the 12th century, that's called a university. And if the faculty are not, willing to change sometimes. And so it makes it extremely difficult to innovate like you have done with the programs that you started speaking about at the outset of this talk. And while what you're doing is you're dealing with specific needs right now. And that is why you're ahead of the game, because with this degree and this program, you can recognize the interdisciplinary nature of everything you're working on, right? You're solving problems through a variety of literatures that inform your actions and decisions, right? We might not see that in many older university contexts. We might see that's in the business school, or that's in the economics department, or that's in political science, or that's in the international affairs school. Here you're bringing, or the law school, here you're bringing things together in very productive ways. And so I wanted to say I learned more about the university while you were speaking. And I wanted to thank you for that introduction, because it is even more impressive to realize the advantage that India has in this in this growth trajectory, in this knowledge growth trajectory. Now, when I speak to students from India, I like to say sincerely from my heart, you are so fortunate to be born and raised in India. And this is because you truly understand the meaning of diversity. You may not understand all of the Indian languages that are officially recognized, but you will listen to them, or you'll see the script, or you might know more about the script. I mean, what other country on earth could do that? You also have, as the ambassador referred to, ancient scripts, arguably, possibly the world's first, I don't want to even call it a religion, but because it really isn't, it is a philosophy. And so we see, you have something to be very authentic and proud of as being an Indian and being born and raised in India, and understanding the diversity of the country's culture. And that is a message that is not fully out there on our news channels on television, and not always available on social media either, because of too many urgent pressing events. And unfortunately, the country that I'm speaking from has been part of that problem twice now in Afghanistan, first leading to Russia leaving and the US leaving in '89. And then we saw what happened in Kashmir at that time. And soon the Kashmiri Pandits had to convert, leave or die on January 19th, 1990, right? And now again, after a 20-year war on terror, it is a very problematic situation that we have left India in. And I want to apologize about this. There's, as an individual in the United States, I think it's a tragic situation that we're facing there right now. And we can't do much with social media on that because the people we want to help are endangered. And whatever is said on social media will endanger them. And that gets back to what is going on in the world with social media right now. We have countries building firewalls or have built already firewalls as we speak. And that means they're trying to control their citizens and their citizens' access to learning about others, right? Controlling the sources of information. Now, it's one thing I'm referring to potentially, particularly China and Russia, and possibly also Iran, although I haven't kept up on the firewall issue with Iran. And so what we have are, open internet spaces, and we have closed internet spaces. And so we open democracies are targets often of misinformation and also of disinformation campaigns. And this is one thing that's very critical to your understanding as a diplomat, as an entrepreneur, as a official in any capacity, as an advocate in any work you decide to go into, that you need to be able to have a critical awareness and understanding of misinformation and disinformation. And one being taking information that out of context, and the second being a subset of that, really intending to deceive with that. We see that very often in election campaigns, or let's say the Brexit referendum, very clearly painted on a bus how much money Britain was paying every week to the European Union. This wasn't a fake ad, and it was false information, and it probably turned a number of votes. But we also saw in the British case, which happened in June 2016, and then in the American case, which happened in a general election in 2016, we now have actual evidence of disinformation campaigns being run in these two countries to support different outcomes than might have happened. I mention this because we've also been studying, I work on social media now, and through Social Science One, we have been studying disinformation and election campaigns and the way candidates are using social media, et cetera. And just as an aside, I mean, it was a very great move by Facebook to remove coordinated inauthentic behavior among various pages before the 2019 election. So I think that is the reason why we see, in terms of volume, less disinformation going on in the Indian electoral context than we see in the US or maybe in the European context. But with that aside, in the field of foreign public diplomacy or in the field of foreign policy and in foreign affairs, this practice of public diplomacy has been forever changed by the internet. It means you, as a diplomat, need to have a presence and an understanding of social media, and you need to be alert to and aware of certain rules that you may not want to do. Like, for example, myself, after the 2016 election, I got a message from Twitter saying, you are one of many people who may have been retweeting or in contact with disinformation that was described in a Senate report, right? And so for diplomats especially, this is a very, very challenging area. But it is an important area to put more knowledge out, it is a venue that is there for India, for India's ministries, for India's young ambassadors, which you all could be before you even become members of the Foreign Service. You could be putting information out there on a Facebook page, on the Arthashastra, if there isn't one there already, and if there is, one that you find important. So I think that the current landscape in which we're working is one in which, well, I'm not sure it's the right analogy, but if it was Arjuna facing the battle and field in front of him, it is a battlefield of information. The battle is over information. The battle is about how it's being said, who's saying it, or who do we think is saying it? And when you look at the rapidly advancing technologies that we have, it is disconcerting to know that our president's voice could be easily replicated just from a couple of snippets in a deep fake, and an announcement could go out on a deep fake piece of disinformation. And that's why for diplomacy and people in foreign affairs, it's so important to maintain those direct calls and the direct person-to-person information that you can, back up given the landscape of challenges that we see in the disinformation environment because of rapidly advancing technologies. So I just want to close by saying that, with this new battlefield of information and with this demographic dividend that India has, you are really not only the future of India, the students who are studying in this program, but you're the future of the world. And you have responsibility and will take that on, I think, willingly, because we see India growing into the global leader that it will be in the next decade. And so with that in mind, I do want to broaden the concepts of what careers you might, take on with this degree, because I think it's while it is wonderful to go into the Foreign Service, maybe not everyone will get in, right? But there are so many other, companies need people like this, right, to work in the diplomatic space, and NGOs and global organizations, and of course, we know all of those. So I want to encourage you to consider the good fortune that you have to be part of such an innovative program and how many paths it opens up for you career-wise. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Amitko. It was indeed a very informative session on the role of diplomacy and how it's changing around the internet. We're seeing that, like you mentioned, information infrastructure, misinformation, disinformation, these are important terms that are changing as diplomacy takes shape. So with that, I'd now like to call Ambassador Professor Ravi Thapar to give his closing remarks. Professor Thapar.
Can you hear?
So your voice is not audible.
Can you unmute?
Thank you so much, Sneha, for that introduction. It's indeed a privilege to share this panel and the dais with such eminent speakers. My very distinguished colleague, former colleague in the Ministry of External Affairs, Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya, and Permanent Secretary right now in the Ministry of External Affairs. Very distinguished Professor, Dr. Semitko. Of course, the wonderful ideas. I'm surprised, even though he's not a practicing diplomat, which have been articulated by our distinguished Vice Chancellor, Professor Rajkumar, Dean Chaulia, who introduced the various advantages of the program and the vision, which propels this whole initiative. So let me just, without repeating some of those ideas, let me just make a few submissions, which is that when I joined the Foreign Service about 38 years ago and signed off 2 years ago, we've come a long way. Diplomacy and foreign policy today is not really being made or discussed or debated upon in the cloistered corridors of foreign offices. But as you have very rightly pointed out, Professor Semetko, the onslaught of media, the 24/7 seamless connectivity, the interdependence of economies and nations, which has been enabled by technology and innovation, has in fact constituted an unending web of relationships. Therefore, what happens in one country strongly impacts on the other. The choices which my government makes do affect me as a citizen. It can lead or boost, mar, or develop economic development, depending on the technology innovation alliances we build up, depending on the explanation of our domestic policies. You just gave an example about Kashmir, how our ambassadors were explaining Article 370. We can create or disturb constituencies of goodwill. And look at our personal lives. It's so nice, of course, to drive your car with Google Map, but sometimes your location settings can be a little bit of a disturbance and irritation. We are making choices of our personal cars today, depending on the emissions benchmarks which our government has signed up for. The mobile which I use has to be protected against cyber attacks. Artificial intelligence is already monitoring my shopping preferences, my tourism and travel options. And we know that it is soon going to be driving autonomous cars and executing drone deliveries at our houses. So all this is very welcome, but sometimes we do need to guide and participate in the discussions which our leadership makes on these issues, whether it is cybersecurity and terrorism, whether it is e-commerce, whether it is climate change, or whether it is technology and innovation alliances. All these are now aspects which are actually being studied, monitored, and commented upon by the ordinary citizen. I would therefore submit to this gathering of panelists and also to the young audience which is tuning in and their parents, that knowledge and in-depth exposure to some of these global issues, in fact, is inevitable. If we have to make sure that our lives are in control and that we can participate in some of these policy issues which are being discussed at multilateral fora, well, we had better be well informed. I would also submit that the program which is stipulated talks about negotiations, talks about diplomacy, talks about foreign policy. But then foreign policy is no longer about political reporting. It's no longer about dispatches. It is also cultural diplomacy. It is also public diplomacy. It is also talking as CEOs and CFOs on behalf of your multinational corporation, like the Google CEO or the Google country head talks in EU about antitrust, penalties. These are issues which you will have to explain as a leader in the business entity which you represent to foreign audiences. My submission, therefore, is that the skills learned in this program are going to empower, as Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya said, our young student population in India and abroad with the right perspectives, with the knowledge, which will prepare them for being global citizens and embarking on the new role which awaits everybody. Today, the stakeholder communities are all connected. It is true that the United Nations is still in an impasse because of the veto power in the Security Council. But the day that is diluted, the rule of the majority of the 193 members in the UN General Assembly will prevail. We will have more order, we will have more multilateralism, whether in the UN or in the WTO. The day is not far when these artificial barriers will be diluted. Internet and technology has completely diluted the concepts of diplomacy. I think that the younger population needs to participate in this whole initiative wholeheartedly. And even if the whole country cannot be in the foreign service, I think this course will prepare our young student population for a very meaningful professional role, whether as part of a think tank, whether as part of a media agency, whether as part of a consulting group. They will develop the perspectives, the skills, and the insights which are required today in this highly interconnected, interdependent world. With these words, I once again take this opportunity to welcome and thank the distinguished speakers who, in their very, very insightful remarks, have given inspirational thoughts for our young audience to participate in this program. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those words. We have now reached the end of this conversation, and what an enriching conversation it has been, and what a launch it has been. Thank you very much, Sneha, for anchoring today's launch. Let me start by expressing our deepest gratitude to our distinguished speakers for the evening, Shri Sanjay Bhattacharya and Professor Holly Sametko, for gracing this occasion with their esteemed presence and sharing their valuable insights. We are truly, truly grateful. Thank you so much. Thank you to our Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. C. Rajkumar, for his visionary leadership, for his imagination and his perseverance that made the launch of this program possible. We are grateful to the Dean of Jindal School of International Affairs, Professor Dr. Sriram Cholia, for his able guidance and stewardship under which this program was developed, and it has taken the shape that it has been able to take. Our gratitude to Professor Ravi Thapar, Executive Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs, for his unwavering support and guidance. To all the faculty and staff at Jindal School of International Affairs who have worked relentlessly to put this program together. Thank you. Thank you to our team at the Admissions and Outreach Office, our IT and communications teams who have been working tirelessly to enable a smooth launch of the program. Congratulations to JSI, congratulations to JGU. And last but not the least, our deepest gratitude to all of you who have virtually joined us to help us mark this important moment in the history of JGU. We are grateful for your presence and your support, and we look forward to your continued engagement, encouragement, and support towards our new undergraduate program in diplomacy and foreign policy. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. We end this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Ambassador Bhattacharya.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Basna.
Thank you.